We call the meeting to order. Are there any adoptions or any additions or deletions of the agenda?
Just one. F2, the introduction of the fire service coordinator. We're going to put that off because he has a report to present under G22, and we'll do that both at the same time.
Okay. Anything else?
No. No.
Oh, this stupid thing. Anyway, we'll just go, could I have a motion to adopt the agenda then, please? Klaus?
I'll move the agenda as amended.
Any discussion? Call for the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Hey, George. Did you fix my little problem here? It was working. Adoption of the minutes. Any errors or omissions of the minutes? Steve?
I'll move the September 2nd minutes, Mr. Chairman.
Any discussion? Call for the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Carried. (9:30). Do we have the CIBC?
Yes, I believe James is on, Mr. Chairman, so
Okay.
with Gundy, just cancel them online here. Hi James, can you hear us?
You go ahead and fix that problem first. Okay. I'll worry about this later.
Give one second, James.
No.
You want to try speaking, James?
Way too much technology, and that's what's screwing me.
Can you hear us, James?
Yes, I can.
Oh, there you go. Okay.
So, good morning, James, and thanks for attending the meeting today. I'm Lauren Hickey. I'm a counselor for Division 1. Klaus, you wanna?
I'm Klaus Vanderveen, Council for Division 6.
Steve Campbell, Counselor Division 5.
Tori Campbell, Counselor Division 2.
Morris Zeenstra, Division 7. Ken Benson, Division 4.
Good. So, are you leading us off?
No, I'll just turn it over to James.
Okay, it's working now. Thanks.
Thank you for having me. I sincerely appreciate it. I just want to make sure everyone can see my screen. I'm not sure if I have permission to share my screen here.
We can give it to you.
Ann? Ann, is Bob on, or is he? No.
Should be able to share now.
Ca- Can you go ahead and share if you want, James?
Still not coming up for some reason.
We have IT here helping us, so sorry. Bear with us.
No.
Are you able to share now?
Will it share yet, James?
No, I'm trying now, but it's nobody can see my screen now. Is that right?
Just you?
I'm sorry, guys. It's not working on my end. What I could do, I do have a presentation here. One of two options. I could email it to you, Jen, and you could put it up on the screen, or I can just kind of talk through it.
If you want to email it, actually Canvas probably. So it's
Okay.
like, you see your name there, it's Steve Rothsey at leftcounty.ca, and then she can share it.
I'm sorry. C what? Sorry.
ROBISON
Okay.
at leftcounty.ca.
Okay. Just give me 1 minute. I'll get that over to you. Sorry, 1 second, guys.
No, that's perfect. I apologize.
Okay, I just sent it to CROBISON at leftcounty.ca. Sure. So sorry about the technical difficulties, everybody. Not sure what's happening here, but anyway, good morning, Mayor and Council. Thank you for having me here this morning. Just by way of introduction, my name's James Hobson, and we're from CIBC Gundy. We manage the long-term investment reserves for the county. And by way of background, we work with 55 municipalities in Alberta, and including a lot of your neighboring counties and cities. And right now we're managing about $3 billion in municipal funds. So the way we manage it is everything is sort of principal guarantee, liquid bonds that is fully compliant, obviously, with the MGA investments. And we work closely with administration on sort of managing your liquidity needs and making sure we're protecting your reserve funds from the eroding effects of inflation over time. The investments have performed very well, and I'll give you an update on the economic situation, how things are going right now, and then also an update on the investments.
Thank you, James. Your email has arrived, so we're just going to move it over to a folder, and then I'll get it open on the screen here for you.
Exciting job.
Yeah. There's lots to view on the beach there at the right time of day.
For sure.
Have you been there?
Wait.
To Antigua? Yeah. Oh.
Let's go.
All right, James, we're cooking.
Perfect.
Run through it.
Perfect.
Just tell me when to hit next screen. Can you see it?
Sure, perfect. Well, that's good we have it up here. So the economic presentation here, this a lot of this information comes straight from our CIBC chief economist in Toronto. We've got direct access to that team, and we do a lot of council presentations and basically just trying to distill this crazy world into sort of what's happening right now and what we should expect over the coming years. So we've titled it "What to Expect from the Recovery's Next Wave." So on the first slide here, if you just jump ahead. So this just shows you the real GDP in Canada. The red line is what's happened, and the gray line is our forecast. Now, you can see sort of how destructive that original COVID, from all the lockdowns that happened in the spring of last year. You can see that we've recovered quite strongly. The second wave of COVID having not much of an impact, actually. A lot of it was due to we were able to contain the cases without locking things down quite as severely as we did in the first wave. Now, the third wave is might be a bit more destructive than the second wave. You can see there that we've got GDP contracting a little bit, and but the good news is things are looking brighter on the horizon. I've been doing this for 14 years, and it's pretty rare that especially since 2015, that I have actual good news to present. So obviously we're sort of in this fourth wave now. Much has to be seen about sort of what the impact is going to be of that. But so far, so good. So if we jump to the next slide, this just shows you sort of the sectors that are doing well and the sectors that are not doing so well. So on the left there, we've got the wholesale, finance and insurance, real estate. These are sectors that contribute to a quarter of all GDP, but they only count for about 10% of employment. Now, so those are the sectors that have led the recovery so far, and what we need to happen is the sectors on the right, which are things like accommodation, entertainment, food services, sort of the services sector, so to speak. We need them to recover. Now, they only contribute about 5% of GDP, but they employ 15% of the population. So they actually they do count for a large number of jobs out there, and I'll walk you through sort of what the ramifications are of that going forward. So if we jump on the next slide here. So we brought this up over the last couple of years. Canadians have surprisingly saved a lot of money during this pandemic. So the chart on the left there shows you growth in personal deposits. Now, as you can see, we haven't seen a spike like this in a long time. Canadians haven't been able to go out for dinner, they haven't been able to travel. So everyone has saved a lot of those stimulus checks that were sent out under CERB. And this sort of, the theory here is that as we move forward in this recovery, all of that cash is going to be unleashed on the economy, so to speak, as things sort of return to normal. Obviously, we've got this little bit of a blip here with the fourth wave and some lockdowns, but over the next couple of years, that cash should be unleashed on the economy. And where is that cash going to go? It's going to go into those services sectors that have been lagging so far. The chart on the right there shows you sort of changes in spending during 2021, where that cash is going to go. It's discretionary spending. It's people going back out to eat, people traveling, things like that. So this is good news as a whole for sort of the robustness of this recovery and sort of what we would expect to see going forward. Now, if we jump to the next slide. So the U.S. is sort of the leading indicator for us. We look to the U.S. to see sort of what's going to happen in Canada 6 months later. Now, this just shows you sort of GDP trends. So, and how things have improved over the last couple of months. Now, the blue line there is sort of the pre-pandemic trend. It's where growth would have been if COVID never happened. And you can see there, the gray line was, sorry, the black line there was the consensus back in January. It's where all economists thought growth was going to be out to 2023. Now, you can see on the black line there, nowhere near to recovering to the pre-pandemic trend line. But the good news here is that the gray line is the latest consensus forecast. And you can see there, by sort of the middle of next year, not only is growth recovering to the pre-pandemic trend, but it's actually starting to exceed that pre-pandemic trend line. So we've seen sort of, it's a different recession in the sense that the sectors that were hit the hardest are the ones that are the easiest to restart as things reopen. So you're seeing quite a sharp bounce back, particularly in the US. So the theory here is that we're going to see this sort of trickle through to Canada, as the US is obviously our largest trading partner. So on the next slide here. Now, we get a lot of questions about inflation, and I'll sort of break it down for you. Now, we've seen sort of some of the highest inflation numbers that we've seen in a long, long time. But if you break it down, this just shows you the US, it's called PCE. It's sort of the inflation indicator. The red line there shows inflation going crazy, sort of north of 4%. And that's clearly sort of way above the central bank's target of 2% inflation. Now, but if you strip out what we'd call the COVID sensitive items, those that were impacted the most by the pandemic, core inflation is hovering right around that 2% mark. So the central banks, not just in Canada, but also in the US, have come out repeatedly saying, even very recently saying, they view this spike in inflation as transitory. There's a couple of reasons for that. The biggest one is what we call the base rate effect. So the simplest way to think about that is if we compare the price of gas last year at 60 cents to the price of gas now, it looks really dramatic. So you're comparing something versus a very sort of anomaly period, which was the COVID drawdowns last year. It's going to look like a lot of inflation. But if you strip out the numbers, really inflation is just recovering to where it would have been if COVID didn't happen, because we saw prices fall obviously last year. The second piece is, if any of you have tried to order anything like furniture, supply bottlenecks in the global shipping, anything from cars, electronics, things like that, that is creating inflation because you just simply can't source goods these days. So the short story here is that the spike in inflation is transitory, according to people that are focusing on this every day. But there is another concern that I think is important to bring to your attention, and that's wage inflation, which I'll walk through in a minute. So if we just jump to the next slide here. So this shows you, if we just sort of pick on one sector, which is restaurants. So restaurants are quite sensitive to the lockdowns, things like that, and see what kind of impact it's had on the demand for labor and wage inflation. So the chart on the left there shows you the restaurant sales per employee. You can see obviously as things locked down, early 2020, you have that massive drop in demand for restaurants. But since then, especially now, you're seeing a massive spike in the US at least of people going back out to eat. Now, on the right there, it shows you the hourly wages of people working in leisure and hospitality, so hotels, transport, restaurants, things like that. And you can see that the wages to employ those people have actually risen above that trend line that we've seen since sort of 2016. So this is something to keep an eye on, because obviously wages are a big factor, a big expense for municipalities, and this has become kind of quite a concern as wage inflation typically tends to run a little bit hotter than core inflation. And I'll walk through kind of why that is the case on the next slide here. So one factor has been that the income support has held people out of the labor force. So Canada doled out about the most fiscal stimulus of any G7 nation through this pandemic. So to put it in perspective, it took 6 months for the government of Canada to dole out as much stimulus as they did for over the 3-year period following the Great Recession. So massive amount of stimulus spent. And what that's done is it's actually held people out of the labor force. If you're getting those CERB checks, you have less incentive to join the labor force. So that has been one thing that's created this this sort of disconnect between the supply and demand for labor, where if you see on the news all the time, restaurants are struggling to hire people. We've seen sort of massive job vacancies, things like that. So it's going to be more difficult over the next couple of years to attract and retain good quality employees. So if I jump to the next slide. If you're going to take anything from this presentation, I think it's this slide. Alberta should see the biggest economic overshoot versus budget expectations of any province in Canada. So on the left is Alberta. It shows you the gray bar is what the province forecasted for growth from 2019 to next year. And you can see the growth forecasts are quite conservative, but the red bar is what the CIBC forecast is for Alberta growth. So expect to see a massive overshoot in terms of growth for Alberta. So it's a very positive story. We've had, the commodity boom has really helped us. That was certainly unexpected. And we should do better than any other province going forward. And I'll kind of break down the numbers in a couple of slides here. So on the next slide, when we're talking about employment, this shows you sort of all employment per province. The red bar is the hardest hit services, which are retail, accommodation, restaurants, and personal services. And the gray bar is all other industries. And you can see there, Alberta has no gray bar, and that's because Alberta's seen flat employment outside of the hard-hit services sectors. So it's good news for the province. It means that the industries that have suffered the most, like I said, are the ones that are the easiest to turn back on. If and when things reopen. Obviously, we just had the lockdown announcement yesterday, but sort of thinking more in the medium to long term, as those sectors get switched back on, the damage to the vast majority of the Alberta economy hasn't been as severe as you might think, especially when it comes to employment. On the next slide. So job vacancy rates, this is another reason why wage inflation is a concern going forward. So we're seeing wage inflation that's actually higher than the pre-pandemic levels of job vacancies. So Alberta is sort of the second on the left there. The gray bar is right before the recession, what the job vacancies were, and the red bar is year-to-date job vacancies. So it's good news for the economy. There's more jobs out there than there are people seeking employment. But again, it's going to create competition amongst employers to attract and retain that talent. So on the next slide, now this is sort of by the numbers. Again, sort of an important slide to look at. The bottom there shows government of sort of the nation, Canada's growth forecast there. You can see in 2020 was sort of a complete write-off, 5.3% contraction, so very, very severe drop in real GDP. But 2021, we're actually forecasting pretty strong growth of 5.7. Now, the second to the top row there shows Alberta, and you can see how hard hit we were last year. We contracted the most of any province by far, falling by 8.2% in terms of real GDP. But 2021, the silver lining here is that we're going to vastly outperform every other province in terms of growth. So our forecast for this year is growth of close to 8% for Alberta versus the national average of 5.7. And then in 2022, growing again the fastest of any province by far going forward. So again, a good news story for Alberta, supported by strong commodity prices, lower taxes, people moving here, relocating here, and things reopening. So on to the next slide. Again, just briefly here, chatting about commodities. No surprise here on the right there. If we look at nominal GDP, the countries that have more exposure to commodities like Canada and particularly Alberta, you're seeing much stronger growth, sort of 2021 versus pre-pandemic, than we certainly would have expected, especially when we saw oil prices collapse last spring. So again, we've seen massive surges in commodities. If you've tried to build anything lately, the price of lumber went crazy, the price of oil recovering to sort of levels that we think are sustainable now. We are bullish on oil and gas, and we think sort of the market has normalized, stabilized in that sort of $65 to $70 range, and we'd expect it to sort of stay there or go higher from here. So again, adding to that sort of growth story for Alberta. So on to the next slide. This is just sort of a reminder that commodities are very boom and bust. For those of us who've lived in Alberta for 20 plus years, we do see boom and bust cycles happen alongside commodities. You can see there the recent huge surge in the commodity price index, and we'd expect it to keep going higher from here. But just keep in mind, sort of at the back of your mind, that these things don't typically last forever. Commodities are sort of boom and bust. So I think we're in for a really solid next few years. But we'll certainly have to keep an eye on the price of commodities to be supportive of not just Alberta growth, but also the strength of the Canadian dollar. So on to the next slide. Now, a lot of us will remember when the Canadian dollar went to par with the US dollar. The chart on the left there shows you what happened with overnight interest rates. And if you remember, the Bank of Canada actually ended up hiking interest rates before the US back then. And what that did is it made our currency more attractive to international investors. So you get paid more to park your money in Canada than you did in the US. So it creates more money flooding into Canada, pushing up the value of the Canadian dollar. Right now it's sitting around 80 cents. That's about as strong as the Bank of Canada wants it. And the reason for that, the chart on the right, shows you since 1975, exports relative to GDP. So when the Canadian dollar is very strong, that's the red bar, we see weaker growth in exports. So if you see the Canadian dollar rally too much, like it is right now, it starts to hurt our export sector, which is a large part of our economy. Now, if we see the Canadian dollar rise, fall below sort of that 75-cent range, we look at it as the inverse of 130, you start to see exports pick up. So we certainly don't expect the Bank of Canada to hike interest rates before the U.S. Our forecast would be for the U.S. to start hiking interest rates sort of end of next year or early 2023, and then the Bank of Canada to follow suit. But we certainly don't expect them to hike before the Fed, the U.S. Fed, sorry. And the reason for that is simply that our currency would rally too much. Bank of Canada gets nervous, anything above 80 cents, and it would crush our exports. So that's sort of our forecast on interest rates over the next couple of years. Now on the next slide, adding to that argument, this shows you sort of the on the left there, the effective interest rate on household debt. So if you've got a big mortgage or you've got a lot of debt, as Canadians tend to have, your effective interest rate on your debt is at an all-time low. So that shows you since 2000, many of you remember, paying 8% on your mortgage. Now you can get a mortgage at, 2%. So what that does is it increases the impact of monetary policy. So for every 25 basis point interest rate hike, it has a much larger impact on people's ability to spend. So the chart on the right there shows you the impact of a 1% increase in the overnight rate in terms of its impact on consumer spending. You can see the huge spike there over the last year. So all this means is when the Bank of Canada starts to hike interest rates, they're going to be very cautious. They're not going to, increase by 2-3%. They're going to hike a quarter point, wait and see what happens, go very gradually, because if they hike too much too soon, they risk stifling out the economy, which is certainly not something they want to see. So it's a bit of a tricky balancing act, for the Bank of Canada that, we are seeing inflation numbers pick up, and but they know that if they start hiking rates to combat that, it's going to have a meaningful impact on consumer spending. So we expect them to hike late next year, early 23, and to do so very cautiously. On the next slide. So again, not to hammer it too hard, but on the left there, it shows you the annualized change in core PCE. So that's sort of the number that economists watch. It's sitting around 2%, which is the Bank of Canada's target. Now, at those levels, you wouldn't expect them to hike or lower interest rates. It's sort of in that sweet spot of where they want things to see. Now, on the right there, this is one positive for wage inflation. You see, if you strip out people that have left the workforce, the unemployment rate's actually higher than what the headline numbers would suggest. So there are people out there that are willing and wanting to work. The problem is just going to be, too many vacancies versus people that are willing to work. But you can see there the huge spike in unemployment during the COVID lockdowns last year. We have recovered basically to pre-pandemic trends, which is obviously good news for all of us. On the next slide. So just to summarize everything, I've thrown a lot at you in a short period of time, but if you just sort of the key takeaways, this recovery should be fuller and faster than those seen from previous recessions. It's not like the Great Recession where it took years to get back to where we were, and that's simply because the services sectors can reopen quickly. It's not like you need to spend massive amounts of capex to get those industries back up to speed. So if and when restrictions are eased, obviously this fourth wave came up pretty quick and fast. As things hopefully improve, then those services sectors can reopen quickly when restrictions are eased. And then again, going back to that chart on household cash, households have plenty of disposable income saved, and we're ready to spend. Now, in the large return in demand in the U.S. is starting to cause inflation pressures, but we'd expect Canada to see that sort of to a lesser degree. I chatted a lot about the Bank of Canada. They're going to wait for the U.S. Fed before they hike interest rates. The change in interest rate expectations, we should see the Canadian dollar weaken a little bit from where it is right now. It's been extremely strong. And then in terms of managing the portfolio, sort of what we pay attention to, interest rates could see another leg higher, but the bond market has adjusted, and I'll walk you through that on the portfolio update on the next slide. But I think going forward, we're already seeing third booster shots starting to come through. So with those variants, they are still a concern for those services industries. So and certainly return to office. So. Our office, we were supposed to go back to work in September, but obviously that's been shut down. And that's a trend that I think is going to stick around for quite a while, working from home. So just on the last slide here, just wanted to give you an update on sort of how the investments have performed since we opened the account a couple of years ago. So 2019 was a very strong year for us. 5.7%, and that's in an all bond portfolio, so no stocks in there whatsoever. Part of the reason we're able to get such strong performance is taking advantage of opportunities when they arise. Administration's been fantastic in working with us. Now, as interest rates fall, we're able to capture excess capital gains, so just boost that investment revenue for the county, and that's why you see such a strong 2019 and 2020. So despite one of the most volatile years of my career, certainly more volatile than the 2008 crash, We saw markets, bond desks were shut. We couldn't get prices on anything. And, through all of that, it was the ultimate stress test for the portfolio, because after all of that, we actually ended up, returning over 3%, 3.22%, which is above the average cost yield on the investments. So very strong couple of years. And then year to date, it's quite interesting. We're very proud of this number, 1.8% up year to date. You would expect, as interest rates have come up a little bit over the last 6 months, you would actually expect us to give up some of those gains over the last couple of years. But we've maintained sort of quite a defensive short duration bond ladder, and to post a positive return when interest rates are going higher is very, very difficult. So you can see here it's a simple strategy. Everything is bank guaranteed bonds and provincial bonds that we ladder across various maturities, across various banks, and then we just manage and monitor it, working with administration to sort of maintain your liquidity when you need it. We have to have that money ready for you if and when you need to spend it, but at the same time optimizing it so that we can protect your reserve funds from that eroding effect of inflation. So that is sort of a quick update on sort of the economy, where we see things going, and on the portfolio as it sits today. So with that, I will end the presentation and answer any questions if you have any.
So thank you. That was very helpful, actually. Are there any questions from anybody? Claus?
Yeah, thank you. That was a great presentation, like Reeve said already. So the interest rates have not climbed any, although our inflation has gone up over 4%. Is this solely due to the pandemic, or because you explained some other things there, but would you say that it would be because of the pandemic only that our interest rates will not have not risen?
Sorry, the audio isn't the best. I think what I heard was, is inflation sort of tied to the COVID pandemic, and where do we see interest rates going? Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay, perfect. Good question. So the short answer is yes. The recent spike in inflation is due to the COVID pandemic. Now, things like comparing today's prices versus prices a year ago when things were absolutely crashed, it's going to look like a big number. But if you sort of average it over the last 2 years, inflation is sort of right in line with where we would have expected pre-pandemic. So, as difficult as it is to accept, you see these headline inflation numbers that look really scary. People that are a lot smarter than me, the Bank of Canada, our chief economists, they are all saying this is transitory. Now, I think with this fourth wave, you are going to see sort of a continuance of those high inflation numbers for the next few months, but they should recede back to sort of that 2% mark, which is what the Bank of Canada is doing. Now, in terms of interest rates, the bond market's what we call the smart market. It's much bigger than the equity market, and it does adjust to inflation expectations. So we did see earlier this year interest rates spike up. We monitor the 10-year Canada bond, which is a good proxy for sort of where the bond market sees inflation. It spiked up to 1.65 earlier this year. It's now come back down to sort of around that 1.25 range. So that's the smartest market in the world, telling you that you really shouldn't be too concerned about inflation over the next decade. Now, we're just sort of in that weird period where you've got these supply chain issues, bottlenecks in trade that are just impacting everything. So I do think, just to reiterate, that wage inflation is going to be difficult. You see, I mean, even in the U.S., you see, for example, the salaries for first-year investment bankers, which is sort of the most intense hours and the highest paid job in finance. They've had to increase them. All the banks are competing. They're increasing those wages materially to try and attract and retain talent. And you see on the news in Toronto, restaurants can't hire people. They want to stay out of those industries because they're uncertain. They're getting locked down. So keep that in mind. I think it's going to be really important to maximize the returns we can on these reserve funds, because your wage inflation is going to be an issue going forward. Hopefully that answers your question.
Thank you.
Any other questions? I just have a couple. You had talked about as people kind of have saved quite a bit of money over the course of the last, say, 18, 20 months. As they begin to spend it, is there any correlation between them starting to spend cash and the interest rates, or is it two totally different things?
So good question. Short answer is yes, there is a correlation. That cash was saved predominantly by the higher income earners because they couldn't spend it, they couldn't travel, things like that. But as they spend that cash, it's going to have a massive boost on consumer spending and GDP in its wake. So if you see GDP start to skyrocket, that's what the Bank of Canada is watching, and that will have an impact on interest rates over the next few years. So the takeaways from that, if you want to borrow money, now is probably as good of a time as ever to borrow money. And in terms of the bond investments, it's a really good environment. Like you can see over the last few years, we've been able to capture excess gains by taking advantage of what we call the steepness of the yield curve. So yeah, the short answer is yes, that cash on the sidelines should lead sort of the next wave of the recovery as things open up. Now again, we've had sort of this this pause, as you will, like with this fourth wave, but you know, with vaccination rates quite high, you would expect this not to last, and that cash start to get spent. People want to travel, they want to get out, you know, reopen those services industries, and that will create a boost that will lead to higher interest rates over the next few years.
Thank you. And my other question is, when you talked about the bond market, as a municipality, you know, some of our investments are fairly, you know, short in term as compared to what a bond would be. Are there bonds that are shorter term investments, like you mentioned the 10-year one, but are there ones that are that would pay a fairly good return less than in term than that, or?
Yes, good question. So yes, there are shorter term bonds. We don't own any long-term bonds. Now, municipalities view they view long-term, quote unquote, as anything longer than 1 year. In the bond world, anything less than 10 years is a short-term bond. 10 to 20 is medium, and 20 plus is long. So the portfolio is laddered sort of in that 3 to 7 year range, with an average duration of maybe 4 to 5 years. So it is relatively short, and what that allows us to do is again manage liquidity. The other thing that we've utilized heavily are some tools that are proprietary to us. They're designed just for municipalities, and they are callable. So oftentimes we'll buy it today, and then it'll get called in a year or two, even though the final maturity might be 7 years. So those are really good instruments to use. They have rates close to 3% right now, which obviously is materially better than, say, owning a 1 year GIC at less than 1%. You're not even keeping up with inflation, and it's locked in. So none of our clients own GICs. It's all bonds. And yes, to answer your question, there are shorter term bonds with attractive yields.
Thank you. Claus?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I got one more question for you. The employees market is down. It seems like you can't get people to work anymore, and we know that partly is it because of the federal package that came out, that people probably think that they're just as well off at home than they're going to work, and some people we can't blame them for that. Do you think that employers are going to be having to pay more money for people going back to work than before the pandemic? And like I said, because it's in the trades, it's all over the place. So it's not only in the retail sector and restaurants and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So yes, that's the short answer. The theory here is that as that fiscal stimulus starts to get clawed back, that will make people re-enter the workforce. That's going to be sort of a positive in terms of trying to keep that wage inflation under control. But to your point, it is it is going to be more expensive to hire people over the next couple of years. But yeah, those stimulus checks certainly have kept people out of the labor force, and the withdrawal of that stimulus, which we're seeing now, it motivates people to go back to work.
Thank you.
Thank you. Morris?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Like the construction industry, where did that really go during COVID? Did it go down? And then the follow-up thing, what I was wondering about, like the lumber prices really dropped again. I wonder, and that's maybe going to pick up the construction end of it again for housing and all of that stuff. Is that going to have an adverse effect or a good effect?
So we have seen housing starts pick up quite a bit. The construction industry, obviously, it actually boomed. The price of lumber was skyrocketing. It has come down quite a bit since the peak. But yeah, like one of those first slides, we were talking about how real estate has been a pretty strong contributor to GDP. It's part of that group of industries that contributes about 25% of all growth. So we would expect the construction industry to do quite well in this type of environment. Sorry, it's quite difficult to hear. It's a bit muffled, so I hope that answered your question. If not, please let me know.
Any other questions? Well, I guess not. But again, thanks very much for making time to do this presentation today. To me, it was very helpful, and we're able to have a little closer look into where we're going and what we can expect for returns on investments, because investments are fairly key to our budget. So thank you.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you, James. We'll let you go now, and I'll be in touch.
Perfect. Thanks, Jen.
Thank you. Do we need to receive that as information? Oh. Okay, Ken? Those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Let's move down then to department reports. And G1, Municipal Services, G1.11, the 2022 capital equipment purchase.
Good morning, Council. This kind of ties in almost very well into that last presentation, as we are seeing similar challenges and supply lines with equipment. So I'm just going to go quickly over the executive summary here. So annually, Council approves the 5-year capital plan as per the MGA. We approve the 5-year capital plans as well as the 3-year operating budget. All purchases for the replacement of existing equipment would be for the 2022 calendar year that I'm presenting today. There is 3 spreadsheets that are attached to this document. One is the 2022, the newest version, and then one is the one that was presented last year, as well as what was presented for, or what has been purchased for 2021, just to show a consistency as far as expenditures across the board. So back in the fall of 2020, during budget deliberations, Council did approve essentially a 5-year capital plan that was 2021 to 2025. This year during budget deliberations, I will present the exact same, or a very similar thing, except for it will be 2022 to 2026. So a lot of the equipment that we had purchased in 2021 has faced some lengthy delays. A lot of this is due to global supply chains, but then some of it is also more localized just to North America as far as supply chains. I'm sure you've all read some of the issues with microchips, and you've obviously seen the empty car lots around here. This has transferred into the equipment industry as well. Just recently, as we were looking at tractors for the ag industry, and some of the equipment dealers are saying you could order something today and you might see it within 12 to 18 months. So there is very long delays in essentially the delivery of these products. I think, like I said, I think that's common see. If you drive down Highway 3, like I said, the dealerships are very sparse as far as it goes for equipment and trucks and so on. So based on a typical year, on a typical purchasing period prior to the pandemic, we would have seen anywhere from a 3 to 6 month turnaround on equipment. Now we're facing timelines of more of the 6 to 12 month period. So what I'm proposing today is essentially for an earlier approval essentially of what our 2022 capital purchases are so that we can move ahead sooner rather than later so that we can have a bunch of our equipment landed in the spring of 2022 for essentially its implementation and use. So the alternative potential to this would be to delay this decision and approve this later in the 2021 calendar year. As I had said before, lots of these are all set out in 5-year plans, though council does approve essentially what that capital equipment is in the 2021 budget deliberations on a typical year. So the financial impact, just to go over that detail, there's a little bit of a change in the equipment that is proposed for the 2022 calendar year, but is very much in line with cost-wise, just right over the $3 million mark as far as capital purchases is very similar to what was presented in the 2021 to 25 capital equipment last year. So my recommendation today is for the approval of the 2022 capital equipment list for purchasing. Now, all of these purchases would fall within the 2022 calendar year. None would fall within the 2021 calendar year. So, therefore, they'd be reflected on next year's capital equipment budget, not this year's. Is there any questions on any of the equipment that I have listed? A lot of it is somewhat standardized to our core operational services, 2 maintenance graders, tractors, 1 for construction, 1 for the Ag Service Board, a forklift for our ongoing duties within the shop and the yard, a track skid steer for construction operations and ASB operations, replacement of 3/4 tons and 1 ton trucks, replacement of a ASB spray truck for our legislative requirements, fuel pumps for Picture Butte and Coaldale, as well as then in the bottom section is the enterprise fleet program, which is basically our cycling of a dozen county units per year, as well as the cycling of a skid steer.
So, just a question that comes to my mind. Jeremy, did you get all of what you ordered for 21 yet?
We have one truck outstanding that was ordered. We ordered a 1-ton truck back in March, and it's expected to arrive in November. So far, expected to arrive in November. With our enterprise fleet trucks that were approved last year, those were ordered in December. They were supposed to land in March, and they didn't arrive until the end of July. Similarly, our graders that we had ordered in December were slated to arrive in March as well, and then they had factory delays due to numerous shutdowns, and then even as they got almost near delivery in late May, early June, the PDI center from Brand Tractor had a COVID shutdown, and their inspectors were actually both hospitalized. So it's an ongoing trend, and then obviously with our new restrictions that came in today, I can't really predict where some of that's going to go, but hopefully this would get us ahead of the game as far as supplying equipment for our core services.
And I did notice the other day a couple of weeks ago, was on the news about both GM and Ford have reduced their production capacity because they simply can't get stuff. So I assume that everybody's in the same boat.
Yeah, the one key one that's a very large challenge in the North American market right now is the microchip supply, because there's only one factory in California that actually makes them, and they only supply 15% of the world's global supply. The remainder comes from overseas, which has been the largest contributor to a lot of these delays as we become increasingly reliant on electronics.
Steve?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the 2021 truck purchases, did you see the prices go up? And that just wondering, just because of the empty lots, is it a kind of a supply demand? Did prices go up with the fewer vehicles out there, I guess?
Thank you, Councillor Campbell. Recently, I just got the bid sheet for the trucks coming in. There hasn't been a large increase, I mean, outside of an inflationary increase to the essentially overall cost points. When we did, not ironically, but when we did receive the trucks that we did here at the end of July, the dealership did say if we wanted to sell them off right now, we could probably make $5 to $10 grand per truck just because there is no supply. And we just happen to be luckily in the queue for trucks essentially at that time. So we haven't seen, outside of inflation, I have not seen that much of an increase. There has been an increase in some areas, some construction areas, as far as the demand for used equipment, just based on some of these supply chain problems that are out there existing right now. So there has been some, a typical inflationary period on equipment that I've observed over the last 10 years has been about 2.5% per year, anywhere from 2 to 3, kind of being the range. In the used market, based on supply and demand, that has seen some larger increases here recently.
Claus?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the majority of our heavy equipment and stuff, does that come out of the U.S. only, or are there a lot of them that come out of Europe? Because we all know that we got the big chip problem, and I guess like Volkswagen, they shut some of their factories down already too because of no chips available. So would you say that, well, apparently you know where your equipment comes from, but the heavy-duty equipment, is that also made in Europe or not?
The majority of heavy equipment is made in North America. There is some that is in Mexico or South America, but the vast majority, the graders are all coming out of the U.S. Tractors are coming out of the U.S. for unless we're buying, an off-market brand, but most of the traditional markets and the equipment dealerships that we deal with here are all primarily made in North America. Some of their components are obviously part of a global supply chain, but the major assembly pieces are essentially within North America.
Any other questions? Seeing not, we could use a motion. Move so what?
The presentation.
No. We need a motion to approve the ordering of, yeah. Okay. Morris. Okay. Any further discussion? Oh, go ahead, Steve.
Just a comment, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. I hate doing this ahead of budget. You tie new council's hands, but I think it weighs greater that you're kind of handicapping staff for next year, unfortunately, if we don't go ahead with it.
Yeah. Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in favor? Those opposed? Carried. Okay, let's move down to Ag Service Board G1.12.
Thank you, Council. This is a continuation from our ASB board meeting that we had last week on September 9th. So administration created terms of reference for the ASB committee. This was identified as one of the committees of council that did not have a terms of reference. So this terms of reference would replace 2 existing policies that are directly related and clearly identified essentially the ASB committee's role. So this has been forwarded to council for approval. So just as an oversight piece, the ASB currently has 2 policies that relate to the committee. Those were 624 and 625, which were function and evaluation and responsibilities. Lots of these are outlined through the ASB Act as well. Previously, the ASB committee was operating, like I said previously, without a terms of reference, so this would now essentially give that committee that piece. So this is very similar to the Emergency Advisory Committee. Any existing standing committees of council are required to have terms of reference to basically act as a guideline for how that committee is composed and so on. Is there any questions in regards to the structure of the terms of reference? It's meant to mirror essentially other committee directions. Quick poll was a no, so I will continue on. As far as the financial impact, there is no financial impact. Essentially, this is a administration document outside of, the administration having to allocate time to develop this. If there is any alternative to be considered by council, is if there's any amendments or any changes to this terms of reference, that's obviously something that administration could adopt accordingly. So with this terms of reference document, this provides council with a clear template that defines the structure and roles of the ASB. And that would be my recommendation today for council to adopt this terms of reference, and then in the rescinding of two policies, 624 and 625, as those would be represented through this terms of reference.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Do you want to make two separate motions out of this one here?
Yeah.
Okay, then I'll move that council approve the terms of reference.
I have no problem with you doing that. I just wonder if we need to rescind the other two first.
Okay?
Was there previous terms of reference?
No, there was no previous terms of reference.
So we don't need to worry about that? Okay. So the motion is to approve the terms of reference. Is there any discussion on that? Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in favor? Those opposed? Carried. Now we do need to rescind policy 624 and 625. We should be able to do those both with the same motion.
Yes.
Ken? Any discussion? Call for the question. Those in favor? Those opposed? Carried. Okay. Then let's do G 1.3, and that is the board, Ag Service Board level of service.
Thank you, council. So this is again a further document that was forwarded from the ASB board committee meeting on September 9th. So between operations staff, myself, and supervisor of ag services, we have created a level of service document to formalize all the activities that are performed by the ASB department. This document mirrors our existing ASB grant agreement, so we submit that to the province on an annual basis for our 5-year grant. That gives us funding for both our legislative services as well as our resource management services. This level of service document sets the baseline for all of our operational activities that are done. And as I previously said, in conjunction with all the legislative requirements, which are in conjunction with the numerous acts that we follow. The four primaries being the Weed Control Act, Pest Control Act, soil conservation, and then to a lesser extent, the animal, sorry, I can't remember the specific act, the animal, I've forgotten it, yeah. So each year, the intention with this level of service document would be each year that this acts as a template for what council approves for the services that are provided under the purview of the existing ASB department. There are several policies that this does essentially bring under the same purview. That being some of the Weed Control Act and Vegetation Management policies that we previously had, as well as Pest Act policies, Soil Conservation Act policies, playground inspections and other playground policies for vegetation management, as well as some general ASB policies in relation to equipment rentals, training and courses, and some of the promotional things that we do internally. I have listed all of those previous policies under previous council direction, because over the years these have all come forward in front of council and been approved accordingly. So this level of service document amalgamates all of those previous policies, and it does do a little bit of rewording in the case of some of them, some specific words that were within, I know within the Pest Control Act, it spoke to the killing of animals, and I just massaged that a little bit so it's not necessarily the word kill in one of our documents. Not to terminate as much a nicer term, but it is a little bit better than that. Terminate existence. Yeah. So just a little bit more background on this. As I said previously, this does represent all the core services that we have and is in conjunction with what we apply for every year under our legislative requirements. This document would be a forward-facing document to the public, as are all of our other policies, and joins all that information essentially under one, in one summary. Alternatives that council could look at, obviously this would be a document, if this is a living document, this would come back to council every year for approval. Essentially it would go to the ASB committee for their review and updating if there was changes in the level of service, and then just like this document today, the ASB committee would initially approve it, and then it would go to council for ratification. If that's the proper phrasing, I'm not sure if ratification is quite right on that. So the financial impact on this one, budget for 2021 and beyond are contained in this policy. The one thing that obviously we would have an inflationary cost increases or wage increases that would be part of the 2022 budget, but this provides the baseline for services that are provided by the ASB department on an ongoing basis. Year to year, like I said, this would be brought forward to council for approval. The intention is, though, this would provide the baseline of services for the department. So my reasons for that recommendation is to provide consistency in the levels of service that we provide, and that this is formed under an approved budget. We will always work within the budget, essentially, to deliver all the core services that we do provide. There are some stuff within this document that are strictly related to legislated, and then there are stuff like roadside mowing or playgrounds that becomes an extra that is a service that council provides to the general public on an ongoing basis. These level of service documents, though, will require flexibility, because the one thing that outside operations are essentially influenced by are weather conditions. For spraying activities, we're in the windiest part of the province, and obviously there are times where we face challenges as far as the timing of some of our services with that in mind. It is our goal, based on each of these stuff like our mowing maps or our spraying maps are very dependent on essentially the given season that we come across on any year. This year being another challenging one from the drought standpoint. Lots of our mowing has been reduced accordingly, because lots of areas don't require a second cut. Same as things like our playgrounds and stuff like that. Our target levels are to cut the grass in these in a 10 to 14 day cycle. Some of those areas will very much be changing some of, or adjusting essentially what we do in those areas, as grass is not, well, we've had a little more moisture lately, but like I said, it's weather dependent. Is there any, so that's a lot of the summary information. Is there any further questions that council has on the recommendation or any of the details that are included within the level of service document?
Are there any other questions? Claus?
Do you want to rescind all the policies before you do
Yeah, I think so.
would you want to do that? Then
Yeah.
I'll move that we rescind. Do you want me to name all the policies?
I would, what I would just say is, I would say to rescind policy 601 to 630, through 630, because they're all listed there.
Okay, then I'll move that we rescind the policies 601 to 630.
Is there any discussion on that? Seeing none, I'll call for the question. Those in favor? Those opposed? Carried. Okay, so the next one would be for the level of service document.
Okay, I can move that one too. Move that council approve the Agriculture Service Board level of service document from Agriculture Service Board Committee recommendation.
Any discussion on that? Call for the question. Those in favor? Those opposed? Carried. Thank you.
Thank you,
Let's
council.
go. Let's just finish this first. We got one more. South Region Ag Service Board Conference in Cardston. I don't know.
Okay, as per the ASB committee meeting, this was another item that was forwarded. So Cardston County has a South Regional conference scheduled for October 6th, obviously with recent restrictions that were announced yesterday by the province. This piece of information may be changing quickly on an ongoing basis. I expect it to be virtual. I reached out to Gary this morning to essentially discuss whether or not this will be virtual, but there has not been a decision made yet as far as that goes. But this was something that was forwarded to council so that they could basically allow any interested members of the ASB committee to attend this accordingly. So previous years, council has recommended that any committee of the whole, any of the ASB council, be essentially approved to attend these sessions. But this was something that is brought to council essentially for approval on that aspect on which members of council would be attending.
I think the recommendation is fine. It's just, if it goes virtual, and that will be the way it goes. And I can't see why it won't be the way things are right now. So,
Yes, I fully expect it to become a virtual event. There is a small financial impact, and I expect potentially that to change as lunch was included with the previous in-person attendee, but there is a small cost essentially for each council member who does attend. So there would be a financial contribution as part of this for the ASB activities.
yeah. Okay, somebody want to make the motion? Cause?
And I'll move that the council allows any interested members of the Agriculture Service Board to attend the South Region Conference in Cardston County on October 6, 21.
Any discussion on it? Call for the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Carried. And we can have a little bit of a break if you'd like.
Excellent.
And let's move down to G2 and G.221 or 2.1 is the January through August Community Peace Officer Report. David?
Good morning, Council.
Morning.
Oh, I'm pretty good, and you? Good. So this is a report focusing on the months of January to August of this year. So as you all know, there's no, you all know it's been in place since 2013, the CPO program. I'm the only one here, and things really haven't changed since I was up here last time. I still do the same thing. Muffled? What do you think? Is that better? Yes. Okay. So I still do the same thing. I focus on commercial vehicles and weights and dimensions. Continually educate operators. And the summer months are busy dealing with handguns. Everybody seems to water every last inch that they own. And also deal with burning prohibited debris, burning during a fire ban, which I was actually quite surprised when we had a fire ban on. I didn't get very many reports, and I didn't see very many people burning, so that was a good thing. They were, from what I could tell, I don't know what everybody else saw out there. Well, that's the problem. But I was impressed when I drove around during the day. So.
I know.
During that time frame, I created 111 case reports. Some of the ones I highlighted, the majority of them were under the highway protection bylaw, and majority of those are handguns. And I have started this year, if I got multiple complaints or I felt someone was blatantly didn't care, I started issuing them a fine for it. So the first fine is if they pay within, 15 days, it's 120. So originally it's 250 if they pay within a certain time. I think it's 15 days. It drops back to 125.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The handguns, it's always a big problem, right?
Yes.
So how do you deal with it when, all of a sudden the wind picks up and there's not a whole lot a person can do about that, right? Do you have any, what do you do with that? Just a question that I got for you.
Yeah, that makes it a little bit challenging. If there is some drifting onto the road, I think we could all agree that we can make an exception to that. But if the handgun is completely hitting it, when there's no wind, it's still hitting the road and it needs to be turned off. But this summer has actually been not too bad because we haven't had a whole lot of wind. Even when I did call individuals, they say, well, there's a north wind blowing or west wind. Well, when I checked, there was no wind at all. So that's not always an excuse. So on 15, fire permit bylaw, 16, dog control. So that could be anything from dog bites to dog barking to dogs off leash, things of that nature. And unsightly premises, that's always a thing in the summer. It's been somewhat down this year, but then I do have some that really need to be cleaned up, so that takes up quite a bit of time to try and get things going. And in some instances, I can't get anywhere with the landowners, then we bring in a contractor and have it cleaned up when all other avenues have been exhausted. And then I've got 38 other reports which fall into the category of garbage dumping, off-highway vehicle complaints. Sometimes my department overlaps with land use, so I help them out and vice versa. And speeding, things of that nature. I think I touched on the challenges with the handguns, the unsightlies. And then, yeah, speeding is always up in the summer months. People are always, as soon as the sun comes out, it gets warm. People are in a hurry to get everywhere. And I had complaints out at Stafford Lake. Just interesting to note, I was sitting out there. This one individual was like seconds away from the park, and he had to pass this other vehicle in a 30 zone and got up to 60. Like it was like literally 3 seconds from the park. So I was out there a few times, and the feedback that I got is that vehicles did slow down after I was out there a few times, so that was a positive thing. And during that time, 321 violation tickets were issued and 186 written warnings. That doesn't include verbal warnings. I try as much as I can to give written warnings, because those are tracked. Whereas the verbal warnings, I don't always give written warnings, so that number should actually be higher. And those tickets mostly fall into the category of speeding, stop sign violations, and commercial vehicle violations. Interesting to note, on the stop sign, I had a complaint at certain intersections, and I had just recently had somebody stopped at a stop sign right at the intersection. My lights were on, everything was fine. This guy blows right through the intersection with me sitting right there. So I guess then I went, okay, I now believe you residents that this is an issue. Well, I mean, I did believe them, but it was, I was kind of shocked actually to see that. So I'd still do joint force operations with the MD of Tabor peace officer, because we overlap, or so we're adjacent to each other. And with the Alberta sheriffs, which are now, all the commercial vehicle guys, they all are now Alberta sheriffs. And sometimes with Lethbridge police. I've done 8 inspections completed. That number has now increased. I think I'm up to 15 now. And nothing really seemed to change there. The passing rate never really, that's generally where it stays at 75% failure rate. And just some of the items on there: underinflated tires, cracked cross members, broken wheel studs, emergency brakes on trailer generally don't work when we test them. And the relationship with the RCMP is great. They never hesitate to come and help me if I need them. They're always there. Actually, I had a tour here last week of the new detachment out in Coaldale, so that was nice. So it's for information purposes only. Financial impact. So some of the revenue received from the tickets are kind of help to offset the CPO program. And there is no recommendations. It's for information purposes only. And that's my report.
So David, just when you were talking about the end guns and the fire permits and all that dog control stuff, what's the numbers compared like to the year before? Are they up, down, about the same?
Just speaking off the top of my head, the handguns would probably be about the same. I mean, I'd have to double check dog control, but I'd like to say it's probably the same, not too much of a change there. Like I said, it's pretty quiet in the winter months, but as soon as spring rolls around, the sun comes out, everybody else comes out, and then that's when things start to come back up again.
Ann?
I could just make a suggestion: when you do your fourth quarter and bring it forward to council, maybe we can do a year-to-year comparison. That might just be helpful.
Yep, no, for
Okay.
sure.
Thank you.
Dory?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. David, when you talk about things like unsightly premises, is that predominantly within the hamlets, or is that also out in the rural part of the county as well?
No, that's predominantly in the hamlets.
And a second question, you did mention, I believe, off-highway vehicles. What has your experience been since the county created a bylaw regarding the ATVs, the off-highway vehicles on county roads? What has compliance been like as far as people following the rules, registration, helmets? Have you encountered what have you encountered in that regard?
The non-compliance that I generally see is them driving around within hamlets, and those are the majority of the complaints I receive. And out on the road, honestly, this year I haven't even seen that many out. And if I do see them and they're not registered, then I would just update them and say, hey, okay, it's allowed, you can be out here. But just make sure you go register and insure it. But the most difficult one to enforce would be the, not difficult, but non-compliance would be wearing a helmet. For sure, for sure.
Claus?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just in other reports that you gave us, you were always talking about, or you mentioned a few times, the complaints of about parking from semis close to the hamlets and subdivisions. Has that calmed down quite a bit, that people are not complaining about that anymore, or what's the score on that?
The one complaint that I do get still is out in Stewart Siding. And as I get them to move their trailers. But I was hoping we could find a solution to something like that, because that seems to be where it sparks up the most, is parking. Because the roadway is not wide enough, so if somebody parks a semi-trailer on the road, then other drivers are complaining that they can't get around, or they have a difficult time maneuvering around. So that's what I use to say, hey, you guys, you need to move your trailers. You can't have them parked here unattended, because your fellow drivers can't get around you. And generally I do get compliance, but we're looking at other alternatives to maybe have it so they don't even park them there at all.
David, isn't that kind of a double-barreled issue? If they leave a loaded truck parked on the pavement, is that not kind of a damage? Like if you leave all that weight there for the weekend or for a week, if you can't unload or something like that, isn't that a more significant issue even than the, like I don't know.
Yeah, you're right. It can cause significant damage to the road if they don't properly block their jacks and distribute that load onto the roadway. They just put their jacks down and block it. It can cause damage, definitely.
Okay, thanks. And I do have one other question, and that's, do you get many, do you have to go to where people call up and say, well, people dump garbage in a ditch, and do you ever have to go to look at those things, or, because I know like sometimes people forget they put their mail in their garbage and threw it in a ditch occasionally. Do you get called to that, or is that the RCMP usually?
No, I do get the occasional call for that, and I've told Public Works, like, if they see a trend in a certain area, to let me know. And especially if they go, like the majority of the time, they'll go there and they'll rummage through it first. And if they can't find anything, then they won't necessarily call me. But if they do, like you said, find tax receipts or any type of personal information, then they give me a call. And then generally it's very easy to track them down and have them clean it up.
Okay. Any other questions? Steve?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Back in the spring, and kind of stemming from last year as well, there was west of Monarch, there was those like problem complaints of campers in the river bottom and partiers and that. Has that kind of toned down since you've kind of been making some patrols out there?
Yeah, that has completely been resolved, and because the county went out and that's completely fenced off now, it's gated. So I think that got resolved back in, yeah, at least for sure, yeah.
And I know back in the spring, some of the people that were complaining, they were appreciative of you attending and making patrols out there too. So they were saying thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions? Nope, seeing none. Thanks very much.
Right, thank you.
And we could receive this for information if you wanted. Steve? Those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Next, we have fire services and the introduction.
Yes, please.
Yeah,
Mr.
okay, Larry.
Thank you, and good morning to all. And I am happy to briefly present Mr. Byron Fraser, who's here today. And Byron is acting in the capacity of Term Fire Services Coordinator for Lethbridge County, scheduled to be in that role until the end of 2021. And as we typically do with new administrative employees and employees who work out of this building at least, we like to bring that individual forth and just allow them to introduce themselves and kind of introduce that person to the public as well, for anyone who may be watching. And in this particular case, I think Byron has been around this area for quite a long while, and I imagine and I believe that all of council know him on some level, at least personally. But with that, Mr. Chairman, maybe I'll turn it back to you and to Byron to have that formal introduction, if you will. Thank you.
Okay, well, thanks, Larry.
You're welcome.
And welcome very much, and thanks for joining the team here. I'm Lauren Hickey. We'll just go around the table and.
I'm Klaus Van der Veen. I just thought to pull it down and you can see it.
Morning, Byron. Welcome.
Morning. Thank you.
Tori Campbell, Division 2. Nice to meet you, Byron.
Okay.
Good.
Thank you, guys. It's a pleasure, and thank you for having me today.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chairman. I was just going to say Byron has very extensive background in fire services and provides a level of expertise to support our functions at Lethbridge County that we've kind of maybe been missing or short on a bit, and so we're very thrilled to have him, and he comes with excellent background, qualifications, and experience. So, all good.
Good.
Excellent. Carry on.
Yep, you
okay,
bet.
Okay, very good. Well, thank you. And we'll look then to the Fire Services Bylaw number 21-017 report. Just to summarize, by adopting a fire services bylaw, it would formally create an entity and a service known as Lethbridge County Fire Services. And that's what we're going to propose to council today. As you can see, our recommendation there towards the top of the report is that council consider adopting this bylaw today, but we'll just go through briefly the report and then be available to address any concerns or questions that may arise out of that. So previously, Lethbridge County has not had a fire services bylaw in place. We do have an emergency management bylaw, as you're all aware, but that applies to larger scale emergency and disaster management, and it absolutely fulfills the requirements of the municipality under the Emergency Management Act. We don't, however, have a bylaw that technically establishes a fire protection service in partnership with our neighboring urban municipalities who provide that service to us. We do that function, but again, we don't have a bylaw, and it appears, through the research that Mr. Fraser here has done, that we really should have such a bylaw in place to give us that formal authority. In order for Byron as well at this point to act in his role as county's fire services coordinator, to give him the authority to assist and work very closely in conjunction with our urban neighbors and departments, it's recommended that this bylaw again be established to create that sort of entity, if you will, of Lethbridge County Fire Services. The purpose is to help deliver fire protection services throughout the country, and this type of bylaw is common throughout the province. Without that bylaw in place, we've already, I guess I'll use the gentle word, sensed that there may be some reluctance by the fire chiefs in some of the contracted urban municipalities and perhaps other organizations too, but to recognize and accept the authority of the county's fire services coordinator.
Could you repeat that again, Larry?
Oh, sure, yes.
Just the last little bit.
Certainly. So without this bylaw in place, we have the sense and some indication that some of the fire chiefs in the region that the county contracts with are reluctant, kind of trying to protect themselves sort of legally and so on, I think, to recognize and accept the authority of the county's fire services coordinator. So with this bylaw, we feel that it would establish that service and give Byron, when he's participating and attending in an emergency scene, some authority to assist, essentially, in whatever capacity the incident commander at the scene may suggest or request.
Well, I guess I understand what you're saying. It's like we're creating a bylaw for a position that's only so far temporary. So I'm just wondering.
I do have a comment on that, if I
Yeah,
may.
you bet.
The bylaw in most other municipalities, what it does is it creates an authority for the municipality to even present fire service. So from what my research and everything is showing is that the municipality itself is required to have a fire service bylaw regardless of who you contract or anything to provide that service to that municipality. So regardless of my position here or not, the departments that we contract for the fire services need that authority to do what they do. There's nothing formal allowing them to do that at this point that I've been able to find. So this bylaw would create that authority for each individual ones, regardless of my position here or not.
Claus.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This bylaw, the county had one before, and I think it was that one got eliminated in about 3 years ago or something. Is this bylaw different than the one before when we had a full-time coordinator working for the county?
I may address that too, if that's okay.
Go ahead.
I've looked back, there has been no bylaw formally doing anything regarding fire services. There's been an emergency management bylaw. We looked back to 1979 and could not actually find a formal bylaw creating a fire service of any kind in Lethbridge County.
Ann?
And just for clarification to Council Vanderveen's question, I think the previous position that was in before was emergency services coordinator, I believe, but the position itself did emergency management and fire services. So there was no bylaw, but I think that's where the confusion comes in. The previous position did both, which was somewhat challenging. Now we contract out emergency management to the town of Coaldale, and so the fire piece is a separate piece that we're putting in place.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. And carrying on with this short report then, with respect to alternatives and some pros and cons, obviously council could choose to adopt the bylaw today. It would formally establish that Lethbridge County Fire Service. It will also enhance the fire services coordinator ability to more effectively fulfill the duties of that position. We didn't really or couldn't identify honestly any disadvantages to having this bylaw. I think we're doing all the things that we can and we need to do and have done for years with respect to providing that fire service. And again, I think this is just a way to formalize that, and with the close working relationship that Byron has and will continue to have while he's here with the regional fire chiefs and departments, this allows them to really, and will give them a level of comfort that will recognize and accept him in his role. Another option, of course, is to defeat the bylaw, and conversely, we're not aware of any advantages to doing that, and we feel it could really hinder Byron in his role as fire services coordinator to fulfill his assigned duties in the most effective and efficient manner possible that will benefit Lethbridge County. With respect to financial impact of the bylaw itself, we didn't identify any particular negative or positive financial impacts, although broadly speaking, we do believe that having someone in this role like Byron will help the county to just oversee responses in the county generally, and to ensure that standards are being followed to the county's expectations, because the county is, of course, paying the bill. So broadly speaking, we do anticipate seeing some efficiencies financially out of this. Can't, put a figure on it or anything at this point. It's all rather brand new as well. But over the long haul, that is what we would expect. The reasons for the recommendation then are just that to adopt the bylaw, it would be in line with other municipalities throughout the province for fire service provision, and it will enhance the ability again of the county's fire services coordinator to better represent the county's interest in fire service matters. And we do have the bylaw attached there, of course, for council's review as well. And with that, I ends my our report, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? Tori?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Larry, when you started, you kind of alluded to the fact that some of our fire services partners might have been somewhat reluctant to cooperate, I suppose, when we're trying to establish these levels of service. With that in mind, as well as the creation of this position and the potential passing of this bylaw, I'm just curious about how this is being how this could be viewed by the fire service providers. Could this potentially be seen as, and I think Byron, you'd probably be able to answer this best, but a threat to autonomy or decision making, and from their perspective, and I guess from our perspective as the county, how do we manage that relationship so that we're still obviously paying for a service, receiving a service, but we have the ability to have some control over that and determine what level of service we'd like to see. I guess that would just be my concern, is that balance between autonomy and control, and how do we get a handle on that?
May I answer? Thanks, Tori. In the beginning, when this first position, I got in this position, I had met with the chiefs and tried to establish what we had decided amongst ourselves was kind of my role here. There was a little bit of kickback, and one of them was that there's no established fire service for Lethbridge County, so there is no authority for Lethbridge County to make any decisions for them or help in any way. So research from that person that actually brought that up, he actually assisted me with creating the bylaw so that they also had authority in our municipality, because as of right now, their bylaws state that they have authority in their municipalities, but there's nothing created emergency service here to even allow us to give them authority. I've been on calls with every department in Lethbridge County since then, and we've worked really good with coordinating, talking about resources, all that on those scenes. Since that first meeting, it's been nothing but positive. Me and my position, I do have a great relationship with them over the past 10, 15 years with those departments. So that attitude has changed quite a bit since that first meeting. On some of the calls I've been, simple things as, hey, can we get this resource, whatever. Am I, questions brought to me, and even text messages when I'm not on the call, just looking for the okay. It kind of relieves some of the weight off their shoulder too, knowing that, yes, the county said they're okay to do this or whatever. So it's actually been very receptive since that initial thing. It's, you guys all know I have a big weight over my shoulders from the previous position that did a similar role to here. And I think we're working good at breaking that boundary moving forward with the departments, actually. So, hope that answered.
So just another couple of things that come to my mind. When you talk about equipment, what, when we have jointly owned equipment, I understand that, but the trucks and stuff have now been kind of registered in the department that has the fire department. So how do you kind of control something that technically you really don't own, although you paid for? Yeah.
I can start. So I think Lethbridge County is trying to, with Byron's assistance, set out a level of service. So, and I know every fire is different, but say you go to a grassland fire, this is the equipment that we expect you'll need. And I think that's what Byron was alluding to earlier. Byron has already adopted almost like a code policy for all the fire chiefs. If you go to this type of fire, this is generally the type of equipment you need. And then what happens, as Byron was saying, because he has this good relationship with the fire chiefs, Byron will either be there or reachable, and they will have a conversation. We need an extra this truck or that truck, and then they can have a conversation. What it does, it clarifies things, so by the time that fire department does send in a bill, that we know that we've already approved that level of service. So we have general level of service guidelines, but then, of course, there's always extenuating circumstances.
So then, next part of my question is under your fire services coordinator. It says the fire services coordinator is responsible for the training programs, use, care, and protection of fire department property, conduct of the fire chiefs and their designated and efficient operations of the fire departments, and then medical co-response program. So I'm kind of confused. What does exactly that mean? Because does that mean you're in charge of the fire chiefs, or?
What it would mean, Mr. Chairman, is as an entity from Lethbridge County, we're expecting them to be able to fulfill a level of service that we've contracted them for.
Right.
So it's my job to oversee and make sure they're keeping up and be able to have that level. So it's not necessarily me saying you have to take this course and stuff, but you're agreeing as a contracted service by Lethbridge County that you're going to provide this for you. So it allows me to oversee and see that they are keeping up that level of standard for training, their equipment's up to need. Maybe it's mitigation we need to get involved in to better something if we're finding that it's not there. Basically, it's me overseeing that they're holding on to their part of bargain of being able to fulfill their contract. Not sure if that's.
I kind of understand where you're going. I'm just concerned about how other municipalities will see that. Because in the past, we've had a lot of complaints about interfering in the operations and what they actually do. So I'm just wondering if this is the way it's worded is maybe going to cause a few problems.
And maybe responsible is the incorrect word, maybe, or overseeing or something, a word used in there instead of.
Or even ensuring,
Yeah, it's just, because I guess we're not necessarily responsible, maybe that is a wrong term. Yeah.
And then one more thing, fire services coordinator means the person employed by Lethbridge County and trained as a safety codes officer who is authorized to carry out the provisions of this bylaw, policies, agreements, and standard operational guidelines, holding the rank of fire chief. I think that's rather a poor choice of words there.
I'll let Byron explain.
Yeah, Ann asked me this exact same question. There's a difference of title and a rank in the fire service. A title obviously is fire service coordinator. What a rank of a fire chief does is kind of give you that overall illusion and authority to access provincial resources, training, all that kind of stuff. The definition of a fire chief is actually responsibility for carrying out day-to-day tasks needed by the organization that is responsible to council through administration. So the term fire chief is always just presumed you're the boss of everything, you run the call, but the fire chief is actually pretty much a manager of that service. You have a chief administrative officer that's the manager of that department. You could take out the word fire in front of it, it's just fire services, and just have a rank of chief. It allows us to access a lot more resources through the province. Alberta Fire Chiefs Association, lots of training elements, all that kind of stuff that I use on a day-to-day basis. Once you lose that rank, you then no longer are accessible to access those.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Just for clarity, you did mention one of the fire chiefs that you talked about and coordinated, but are all the fire chiefs that we contract service of aware that this bylaw is coming forward? And if so, were there any concerns brought to you at that time?
Actually, yes, I've talked to them all quite thoroughly about it. I've sat down with 3 of the departments and went through this document. A lot of them are realizing that they didn't know there wasn't one established prior, and the fact that their authority right now is not official out in the municipality. So they're looking forward to a bylaw being created to actually give them authority. And if you did go through the authority list in there, a lot of the fire departments need that authority in order to mitigate the situation that we're required to mitigate in an emergency situation. Did that answer?
So then, I'm sorry, two more questions come to my mind then. It says the authority of members, the fire chief, their designate, or the fire services coordinator shall have the authority to, and there's 7 things that are listed there. So I guess, does that mean that you would have the ability to act as a fire chief if there was not one on site? Like, I'm not sure what that means exactly.
Yeah, exactly. What it's gonna mean, if they requested me to act as an authoritative position or their fire department, by all means, I'm fully qualified to do that, but it would be at request of the departments. What that would do is if in the state of local emergency or anything that we determined that we needed as a municipality to take extra steps, it could give me that authority from the emergency manager to fulfill some of those duties that are reported in there. So ultimately, it's still giving the fire chiefs and their departments 100% of control of the operations, unless they requested me to assist them. But it just gives me the authority that if something over and above happens, I can then be passed down that authority also.
Ann?
Just a question too, Byron. Will you be doing standard operating procedures? Like if this bylaw does get passed, will you then sit down with the fire chiefs and say, look, this is what would happen, so that there wasn't this concern or fear that you'd usurp their authority?
Absolutely. I've made it perfectly. I've met with all of them individually multiple times already now. It's set out right in my initial chat with them that we're not here to take anything over from them whatsoever. I'm here as an aid to them, sit beside them on an emergency scene, and whether it's okaying resource brought in, or I have a lot of different contacts than they may have, different resources I can possibly bring in that can aid them in that assessment.
So that brings up my last kind of thought. I understand you've got good response from the fire chiefs and the fire departments. Where I'm having an issue or a concern is, what are the councils of that each municipality going to think? And that's where we ran into trouble before. So a lot of this stuff is kind of worded almost like we have more power to assume their responsibility. And I have a little bit of an issue with that before we talk to the councils or explain it to them better than what we may or possibly be due by passing a bylaw today. Ann?
I think we have a bit of challenge right now because we're before an election. But there is a scheduled CAO meeting, because I'm trying to have quarterly meetings with the CAO. It's certainly, if council wants to put this off, something I could talk to the CAOs about, and they could bring it to their council. But I understand what you're saying. You'd like the whole councils to be involved. The challenge is we're right now in such a flux situation with the current council. The other thing we could do is do a first reading. We could put this off, we could do a first reading, we can do whatever council wishes, but there's a couple of options with this bylaw. My only concern is I didn't realize until Byron started doing some research that we didn't have anything in place. So even talking to the city, Byron's had a few meetings with the city, they're concerned too that they don't have any authority to act on our behalf as a contractor. That's my only concern. But I do understand the political and the other administrative piece as well, too.
May I, Mr. Speaker?
Yeah, go ahead.
Under the Forest and Prairie Protection Act, section, sorry, I don't have the whole thing with me, section 7, subsection 1, the council of a municipal district is responsible for firefighting and control of all fires within the boundaries of the municipal district. So ultimately, the county itself is responsible for all those areas outside each individual municipalities, whether you have an established fire service or not, but it's their responsibility to contract or have a fire service themselves to provide that service. So from the research I've done and stuff, it's a bylaw that needs to be there even to give those chiefs authority to do their job, which kind of sounds weird. In the fire service, everybody just, they're a fire department, let's let them do their job. But from what I understand, they don't actually have full authority to do what they're doing as of right now.
Ken?
I feel a lot better if the fire chiefs from all the stations and you are in here when we're getting to see, make sure that they're good with it, because otherwise, like right now, I don't know what their thing is. If they're all fire chiefs who are sitting back here, I'd feel a lot better. That would indicate that they're on.
Claus and then Ann?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I think that we have Byron in place for that, for the communication, everything like that. So I think that is it's not necessary that we have all the fire chiefs in here to do that same kind of thing. The only question that I have is that are all the councils, are they aware of that this is going on? Because I think that is probably the more important question, that we have this all established and then they say, I didn't know about this.
Yes, I have indicated to all the CAOs and asked them, and they have indicated that yes, their councils are aware. So how and when they told their councils that, I don't know personally, but yeah.
Claus?
So with that, I would probably prefer to have the first reading done now so that we have the ball rolling.
Yeah.
And that we, as soon as the election is over, that we get together and then we finalize it.
I just wanted to echo Councillor Vanderveen's thought, because I understand what Councillor Benson is saying, but we have staff here who are having these negotiations with the fire chief, and we have to trust what staff is telling us, so.
And don't get me wrong, I'm not arguing that fact. What I am extremely concerned about is exactly what Claus said. I don't know how much the other councils know, and I think that's where we got into trouble before, was just a lack of communication between council and who's ever the CEOs or who's ever making the agreement. That's where it seems to have broken down.
I do have a suggestion, if it just a thought, is we could actually send a letter from council to council and just explaining that we're looking at this bylaw and here's why. So that way we know what kind of communication is going to that council and we don't worry about anything getting misinterpreted.
Yeah,
Do
that'd
you
be
think
a
that
good
would be?
idea.
Okay.
Tori?
I still like what was touched on, the idea of giving it standing, though. I do think that it doesn't hurt to do first reading today. I think it gives it standing. Then it's on the record, officially known. It's public knowledge as well as if we communicate it. I think maybe I look at it a little differently than the majority of council that's spoken, though. We are paying for a service. We are paying these municipalities for a service. So as much as I do completely understand that communication is key, at the end of the day, from what's been communicated from Byron and Larry here, is that this is a necessity in one way or another. So maybe that means there has to be some massaging of the document itself, but I would hate to see this drag out any longer than it has to as well. If this is a requirement and this is something that we need to do, I don't believe that waiting until after the election is a necessity. I do think we still have we still have a meeting before the election. I don't know if that's too tight of a timeline, but I just hate to keep postponing the inevitable of getting this done.
Steve?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would agree with Tori if we move ahead with first reading and have some communication and pass the rest of it next meeting would be sufficient, I think. And we're doing our part for some communication. We don't get it in return, so at least we're getting ahead of the ball. Originally reading it, I had some concerns, but the questions and responses have been really eased my mind this morning, so I would be going ahead to approve something here.
Any other discussion? Morris?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm all in favor of that too, to go ahead with the first reading. However, there seems to be some misconception by certain volunteers of the departments, Byron, and I'm not sure if you know that or not. However, and I got in quite an argument with one of the volunteers what your position is all about, and one of them, of course, I said, hey, we spend that kind of money. I think we have a right to have a person like you there. So what I was wondering, do the chiefs maybe had a good explanation to the rest of the volunteers what your position is? And that's what it's.
Yeah,
I got in quite a heated argument with this one
Is that right?
volunteer.
Okay. Yeah, that's a very good question. I have talked to the chiefs extensively, and like I said, I've been on scenes with all of them since I've started, and had no negative feelings or effects toward this to me directly. So I don't know what they communicate with their departments. That's not really my authority to do that. I communicate with them as we're trying to collaborate and make a great team, and my overall feeling is really positive at this point. So I don't know who that was, obviously, but I haven't been directly at all. So.
But after the heated argument, he seems to back out a little bit for what he said. So maybe he was misinformed, I think.
That's a
That's what I
possibility.
kind of think,
Yeah. Because like I said, I've been on a call with each fire department, and nobody's made me not feel welcome at all yet. So.
Okay. Larry?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just one other small point just comes to mind, and that is in the fire and rescue service agreements that we recently had signed by the municipalities and the county, right in there as well, and those are all, of course, approved by the respective councils, but there is a clause that states that both, sides will agree to establish standard operating levels of service and so on. So, maybe it doesn't quite, not as thorough as what this bylaw might be, but there is that element to it. So those other municipalities, I think even at the council level, should be aware that, there'll be more, closer working relationship, let's say, for now with that. Thank you.
Byron, go ahead.
To just reiterate what Larry was saying, in that contract, it does state that there's a representative from the county going to be assisting in the completion of the policies and bylaws and stuff to do operations. So they did at one point recognize that there will be someone from the county being involved in that.
So I actually have no problem with giving it first reading, but I just want some communication to go out to the other councils and with a little bit of an explanation. Ann?
Further to Councillor Zeenstra's comments too, that, Byron's exactly right. He's communicating with the fire chiefs. We don't know how the communication is being filtered down, and everybody's a little bit different. So I think in addition to the piece directly to the councils, we may want to just kind of put out a PSA with regards to this bylaw and the intent of it. Maybe that's an option too, so that it's out there in the public. Just a thought.
Okay. So with that, if there's no other discussion, we should have a motion for first reading. Ken? Any more discussion?
Mr. Chairman?
Yep, go ahead, sorry.
Should we entertain as amended as per the recommendation you have regarding some of the language there? Would that be?
Yeah, I guess so. Sorry, I didn't think of that.
So we wanted to, can we just get the line clear there, Larry? Can you read it so we can amend it properly?
And I'm sorry, I'm not exactly sure which line we're looking to change. I know it was talked about, pardon me.
Section 4, the.
Okay.
Responsible for the, training programs, Karen.
Okay. And it, was it just that one word we wanted to soften? Oh, okay. So it currently reads, "The Fire Services Coordinator is responsible for the overall budgeting protocols and functions of the Lethbridge County Fire Services structure in accordance with the bylaws, policies, agreements, and standard operational guidelines established by council as amended from time to time."
What if we change that responsible to ensure the fire departments are meeting? Or do you have a better idea,
Well,
Byron?
just a quick, I believe it's the next paragraph you were referring to.
Well, mine's all gone yellow now, so I can't tell you.
I may read it to see if I'm correct.
Yeah.
The fire service coordinator is responsible for the training programs, use, care, and protection of the fire department property, conduct of the fire chiefs and their designation.
Yeah, that
You know,
was-
to be totally honest with you, maybe we don't even need that whole section in there.
Okay.
It's not a necessity in the bylaw?
I don't think so. I think they're responsible for their department. At the most we could do is just an oversee to, the rest of it, in my opinion, says we're kind of overseeing their operations. So I don't necessarily, unless you have a different wording that you think might
No.
be sufficient.
And the only other one was I had the one about the fire chief, and I appreciate your explanation about that. But I think it would be important to send an explanation of exactly what you said out in this communication.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Okay?
Did you get all that, Larry?
I'm not recording this, I'm sorry. I'm not sure. Candace, are you clear? Or-
Oh, okay. So do we want to take that section out, or do we want to leave it in and say responsible for ensuring? Is that, well, I don't know. What do you guys? Well, Klaus has an idea.
Maybe if we want to be thorough on all this stuff, can we make that change before the second reading?
Yes, yes, we can bring it back for the second reading. Okay, that's a good
That's
idea.
probably a great plan.
Okay.
Excellent.
Okay. Tori, are you okay with that? Yeah. Okay. So we have first reading on, as a motion on the floor. And any further discussion? I'll call the question. Those in favor? Those opposed? Carried. Okay, so we'll send out the communication and
Yep.
go from there.
We'll work on that and get it out like right away.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Thank you,
Thank you.
Byron.
Thank you.
Council.
And welcome.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, let's move down to G.2.3, Alberta Development Officers Week, September 19th to the 25th.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Hopefully this doesn't bear too much discussion. This week I was sent by the Alberta Development Officers Association a notice that this next coming week is considered Alberta Development Officers Week in the province of Alberta. And as an opportunity that council has is to proclaim this week officially and to recognize the Lethbridge County Development Officer, which is Sarah Mitchell. Unfortunately, she's not here today. She's traveling to Ontario for her sister's wedding. So I'm here kind of acting on her behalf and as supervisor for that department. So just as a little background in with regards to that, the development officers are considered current planning and development specialists with expertise in current provincial legislation, municipal policies and bylaws, and technical requirements for the physical development within Alberta communities. In order to acknowledge the importance of the development officers, the county administration is formally requesting that County Council proclaim the week of September 19th to 25th to be designated as Alberta Development Officers Week within Lethbridge County. And I have included in the package, which I am sorry came just this morning, with the formal proclamation. I'll turn it back to you, Mr. Chairman, if there's any questions.
Any questions? Sorry?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd move the recommendation that County Council proclaim the week of September 19th to 25th to be designated as Alberta Development Officers Week within Lethbridge County.
Any discussion? Call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Carried.
Thank you, Mr.
Thanks,
Chairman
Ellery.
and Council.
Thanks, Hillary.
Let's go down to corporate services, G.3.1, 2022 budget presentation schedule.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Included in this report is the proposed 2022 budget presentation schedule for the upcoming 2022 to 2024 operating budget and 2022 to 2026 capital budget. So the schedule presents a timeline for budget presentations from staff for council's review and direction, culminating with the final approval of the budget. As council is aware, in the Municipal Government Act, council must adopt an operating and capital budget each calendar year. The budget schedule has been developed to ensure that council has set dates and ample opportunity to review the budget and receive presentations from administration for the purpose of deliberation, discussion, and again, final approval. We have already actually started the budget process, and as a senior leadership team, we'll be meeting next week to review proposed capital already. So the process on our end has already begun. Now, these dates are not set in stone, but and I have spoken with the executive administrator to see what upcoming dates council will have in their calendar for the months of November and December. So we try to work around those as best we can. Should any of the dates need to be changed moving forward, we can definitely do so. But in the meantime, it's nice to have a bit of a schedule so that administration can prepare the budget documents and have a draft to council prior to a first meeting. So the recommendation from administration is that County Council approve the 2022 budget presentation schedule as presented.
Jen, you might have covered this when I ran out, but also given the fact that we're having an election on the 18th, we would likely bring this back with the new council and then just to make sure everybody can meet those dates.
Yeah.
We can definitely, yeah.
Okay, any questions? Need a motion then. Steve? Any discussion? Call for the question. Those in favor? Carried. Opposed? Carried.
Thank you.
Thank you. Let's do administration, G.4.1, Lethbridge County Council attendance. Oops.
I'm not moving. I'm just going to stay here. We'll just start with this is our monthly council report, and we'll start with the Reeve. Right.
So on August the 3rd, I had a meeting with the Minister of
Is that what we normally do?
Transportation. Also that afternoon, had a meeting with the intermunicipal community meeting with the town of Colhurst. The 5th was council. The 12th, well, hopefully somebody can fill me in, and the 18th, because mine is yellow again.
Meeting with CEO.
Oh, meeting with CEO, and the 18th, council?
Yeah.
Council, thank you. 24th,
No, okay, yeah.
24th was the Municipal Development Plan Council Workshop, and the 31st was the meeting with the CEO. Any questions? Thanks.
August 5th, Lethbridge County Council meeting. Also on the 5th, we had a virtual Chinook Arch Library meeting. And on the 24th, Municipal Development Plan Council Workshop. Thank you.
Bob was unable to attend any because he was in hospital. So, Ken.
Okay, August 3rd, meeting with the Minister of Transportation and the intermunicipal committee with Colhurst. The 5th is Lethbridge County meeting. 24th was the Municipal Development Plan Workshop. 28th, the Colhurst Parade and Spray Park opening.
Thanks, Ken. Steve?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. August 3rd, meeting with Minister of Transportation, as well as intermunicipal committee meeting with Colhurst. August 4th, Exhibition Park Board meeting. 5th, County Council meeting. And August 24th, Municipal Development Plan workshop.
Thanks.
And,
Pause?
okay, meeting with Minister of Transportation, August 3rd. August 3rd, also intermunicipal committee meeting with Colhurst. The 5th, we had a council meeting. The 21st was Jamboree Days, and the 24th was Municipal Development Plan Council Workshop. And just a correction above, I said, yes, you had a meeting at the 18th, the council meeting. We didn't have a council.
No. So I don't know what it is because I can't. Mine's blacked, yellowed out.
Okay, 18th was a meeting with me.
Oh, okay.
CEO, yeah.
Thank you. Morris?
Thank you. August the 3rd, meeting with Minister of Transportation. August 21st, Picture Butte Jamboree Days. August the 24th, Municipal Development Plan Workshop. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's move down then to G.4.2, Town of Colhurst.
Good morning. So we had a request for a committee from the town of Colhurst. They were seeking interest in forming a committee and working together to attempt to find the burial records information to form a permanent residence or registry. And they're trying to reach out to other municipalities to see if we're interested in this. What my recommendation is to council that we postpone this and consider looking at this at the organizational meeting after the election, because I think we're too close to the election right now to think about forming a committee. The concern from the town of Colhurst is that there's not enough burial record information, and they're aware of a cemetery that's located on private land east of Diamond City with potential ties to the Colhurst community. So they would like to move this forward, but my recommendation is that it's a little too close to the election, and it's something we might want to address during the organizational meeting.
Steve?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't see anything political in this. I don't think there needs to be a committee. I think province would have records of this. Can't they just contact the province, or in conjunction with county staff contact province if they're find some information?
Absolutely, and we can give that back to them. Yep. I'm not sure, Steve, why they wanted to form a committee. I just think that's their go-to.
Claus?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree with Steve there. I think that, if we're going to create a committee for that, all they wanted to know is, what Steve just said, that they want to find out who is buried there and everything like that. And there's other avenues about going about that than having to create a committee and making everything really complicated.
Yeah, I would really have to agree with that too, because I was just thinking of at least 12 years ago or so, we had a request come to council for people to be buried in a graveyard that was in the county, but not open. How would you put it? Not open, sounds like a bad word.
Private?
But no, it was a graveyard at one time, but it was no longer
It was like
inactive or something they called it.
that's a good word.
And it was
Inactive.
quite a process to go through with the government to figure out what they can and can't do. So I don't see that the committee would have any bearing on the outcome of that whatsoever. Again, it'd just be a cumbersome thing because the administration is going to have to do all the work anyways.
Yes, yeah. So we can certainly do that and send a letter to Colhurst about their request. Yes. Okay. If that's
Do we need that in the form of a motion?
sure, that would be helpful.
Do you want to make that, Steve?
Yes, I do.
Okay. We're just sending them a letter telling them what we talked about.
We can figure out the rest.
Any further discussion? Call for the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Readymade, G.4.3.
We received correspondence from the Readymade Community Center. They were very thankful on the donation that council gave. But of course, with the new COVID restrictions, and we actually received this before this latest, last night's announcement, the event had to be postponed due to the increase in COVID cases. So the committee is concerned about the money, and they don't feel, they wanted to know where county council was at with this $1,050. Should they return it? But our recommendation to council is that they retain the donation funds for a future use. But that's up to, obviously, the discussion of council.
So, you mean by a future use, like along the same line?
Well,
Or
it's
totally different, or whatever they
It's up
want?
to council's discretion. We can send a letter to them advising them that they could keep it for that use or for whatever donation purposes they see fit. It's at your discretion.
I'm fine with that, I don't,
They got it already, right?
Yes. Yes, we did.
we need a motion now to cover off that. Dory?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, I'd be willing to move the recommendation that the Readymade Community Center retain the donation funds.
Do you want to take that last part out to use as they see fit?
Do we really have a direction as council how we feel about that? Yeah, I'm fine with them.
I'm kind of fine with it too, but it's I find that they're basically getting $1,050 there and just sitting in their pot there to do whatever they want with it later on. I kind of find it a little bit weird that we're doing it that way, because if they want to have something that they think is worth of a donation, that you know, it's good that the county's informed and that we know. So I would suggest just give the donation back, and whenever you guys have something again, just apply for it.
I guess I'll make the motion then as it's written until the celebration of Indigenous culture event can take place.
Okay.
But do you specify that it has to be for that special event? Okay, yeah, no, then.
Okay, any further discussion? Call the question, those in favor? Opposed, carried, thank you. And we have a closed session, so we need to move into closed session. Steve? All in favor? Carried.
Stay up with it.